pick back up with number 15. Well, just to recap before we move on, let me make sure I got all yours jotted down. Like I said, so you had number 15 Washington, number 14 Oklahoma, number 13 Notre Dame, number 12 FSU, and number 11 Oregon. And I do like all those picks, and I've got some of the same ones. So number 15, I've got Tennessee, and Tennessee, I can keep it pretty short and sweet because there's really only one flaw in this situation. So Tennessee, uh, team for team, was probably the best offense overall. Um, I'd put them right up there with USC or Ohio State last year. I mean, they were putting up tons of points. Quarterback threw for like 4,000 yards, bunch of touchdowns, very little interceptions. Well, no matter what you think about this offense, you have to give them their due for the most part, other than against Georgia last year, and I guess you could say South Carolina, but that was more of a defensive falter, in my opinion. Um, they played really, really well. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anybody torch Alabama quite the way they did last year. I mean, they just absolutely lit them up. But in those same games, they got lit up, and their defense had just tons of issues. I mean, they were ranked 121st in pass defense last year. And if you're going to be a title team, which I know that Tennessee fans and University of Tennessee feels like they should be, you can't be ranked 120th in anything, right? You're going to have to be serviceable in all areas, and that is the biggest question for me on this team this year. What are you going to do to play some complementary football? Don't leave your defense out to dry, because that happened a lot last year. And the beauty of going fast is when it works, you score a lot of points. But your defense also plays a ton of possessions, and they were wore out all for the second half of every single game. They were wore out, and um, so whenever you're scoring every time, but then another team comes in and they decide they're going to run the ball on you and slow the game down, it puts you in a situation that it is really hard to overcome, especially when you're playing big boy football against Georgia and Alabama, which Tennessee plays every single year. So I have a little bit of question about their offensive line, and I have a little bit of a question, well, more than a little bit of a question about their defense. They've got to step up, and they got to tackle somebody, man. People were running on them, and Georgia was running on them, especially in the second half of the game. So that was one of the elite rushing attacks that they faced, and I don't think they fared all that well. But it's really the over the top that's really the problem. You can't be giving up the kind of yards that they were last year. So let's take a look at their schedule real quick. Um, Tennessee is always going to have a hard schedule, but they start off at Virginia. Okay, and actually, it's not at Virginia. This is actually a neutral site game, from what I understand. I was looking into this last night because I was curious where they were playing. Tennessee's about a 28-point favorite on that, and I think Virginia is really, really bad. So you got Virginia, Austin Peay. Those are two dubs right there. Then you go at Florida. I think Tennessee is going to stomp the ever living crap out of Florida this year. That's my opinion. Tennessee fans will never say that because Florida's been kind of like, even when Florida's bad and Tennessee's good, Tennessee's had a hard time putting them down. And even last year, as bad as Florida was and as good as Tennessee was, it actually came down to an onside kick in that game, and it never should have. But then you've got, I think, like I said, Tennessee wins that game at Florida. Then you got UTSA. This ain't no joke. I ain't going to lie to you. UTSA has landed in a lot of top 25s. I don't have any G5 teams in my top 25. I feel like that's a little bit too hard to predict. And I'm looking at all the Power 5, teams and all that good stuff. So, uh, you know, Then you got South Carolina at home. I think Tennessee is going to have that one circled, especially considering South Carolina put up 63 on them last year. But um, then you got Texas A&M at home. That's going to be a tough game. And then at Alabama. So you got a 3-game stretch right there: South Carolina, Texas A&M, at Bama, and then you go at Kentucky. And you do have a bye week in between South Carolina and Texas A&M, which is the first 2 games of that 4-game set. I have an extremely hard time believing that Tennessee's going to make it through that stretch undefeated. I mean, that's the at Bama game. I think you lose, and probably one of the other games. So if you can go 2-2 right there, I think you're in good shape. And then you've got UConn at Missouri, Georgia at your place, and then to end the year, you've got Vanderbilt at home. I don't think you're beating Georgia, so that brings me to 9-3. That's kind of where I see Tennessee this year. I think it's going to be a good offense again. I think Joe Milton is going to be able to figure it out. We've seen some accuracy issues, especially downfield with him in the past at Michigan. But I think this offense is set up for him, and he's an amazing athlete. And I think that we're going to see big numbers from the Tennessee offense again. Just who's going to step up on D? Who's going to step up?
It's time for the top 10 heading into the 2023 season. Now, like I said, let's just go 1-1. At number 10, a team that you've already mentioned, I've got Tennessee. So 2022 was as they finished 11-2 last season, lost to UGA and South Carolina in a game that they really shouldn't have lost, but against South Carolina, that is. But I mean, they got drug. I mean, that was just really, really bad. That I think South Carolina, put up 63 on them, but they were the number 1 scorer in offense and actually 35 on defense, which really isn't that bad for a Tennessee team that gave up 63 again to South Carolina, gave up 50 to Alabama. I mean, you erase those two, and they're probably a top 20 defense and scoring defense at least. So they had a pretty good defense considering, what you mentioned earlier about Tennessee, and that, if the offense is out there scoring, the defense really isn't getting a break. So you kind of saw the byproduct of that against South Carolina, I think, where, South Carolina just kept scoring too. I mean, it seemed like every third play on offense for South Carolina, they were scoring against this defense. So, and then, the Tennessee's offense isn't doing their defense any favors by going out and scoring right away either. So it really just snowballed. And if you don't score on some of those opportunities, you could really get yourself into trouble. But still, even with that, they were able to win 11 games last year. Wide receiver will have some drop off. They'll need to rely on the unit collectively as opposed to 1 or 2 wide receivers like they did last year with Hyatt and Tillman. They're not as top heavy. So now they've got to rely on the whole unit, spread the ball out a little bit more. Brew McCoy and Squirrel White will be the main contributors. They also got a transfer out of Oregon and Dante Thornton, who's one to keep an eye on. On the offensive line, they lost Wright and Carvin. And it's going to be tough to replace those two. This unit should see some drop off, but this is an all senior group that's going to be starting this year. So that could have some upside. They should at least have a familiarity with each other and be able to gel, which is an important piece of an offensive line. But I do think that their talent went down. So that's going to be interesting. Heupel can scheme around an offensive line. That's not really a big issue. But I'll be anxious to see what they're able to put together on O-line. On the defensive side of the ball, Tyler Barron is going to be the one leaned on heavily to provide that pass rush. All starters outside of that, all starters based on my depth chart are in at least their 4th season. So does that mean players are going to get better and perform and they're finished products now, some of whom are NFL caliber talent? Maybe not. Maybe it's just, the fact that they were like really not all that talented from the beginning, and they've been playing football for so long. It's probably, it's probably 50-50, right? Half of them are getting that last season in and trying to win a championship with their college team and provide upside for their NFL draft stock, and then half of them are probably gonna end up just being college players at the end of the day. But they also do have some young talent that could step in and overtake them if things get off the rails. So with that being said, I think we have the same record. I've got Tennessee finishing at 9-3. I have them losing to Bama and UGA and dropping one more game. If I had to choose, I'd say it's probably going to be Texas A&M that they lose.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're going to slip up against one more team, and maybe in that. Maybe Texas A&M, given that they're going to face them week 7 and then go into Bama, and so that could be a tough matchup and a little bit of a trap game as they may want to look ahead to Bama, but that would be certainly a mistake. So, who you got for number 10, Mark?
Yeah, and